Tanse totemtik, neomagantik, kakiokitatum skatanoau. Ape nasko team mamotai mau kasi manitu. Anoka kiskake kwa matsuan I kitsiwatsit. Ninaskamon na komina gitwam gisagaw iwa pataman. Mitwaniti pikwawi akota mia machiho ekwa mi wetam. Ni taga wetan ka petaman kikwe ota mio apatsikwe. I just wanted to greet you all as friends and as relatives and just give thanks for another day, for life, for all the gifts that we have. And I hope you're all feeling healthy and happy today, wherever you are. And I hope you hear something of value with this recording that I'm going to share with you. My name is Dwayne Donald. And as you can see, I'm speaking to you from this beautiful place here. A place I've visited often, studied often over the last many years. You probably know this place where I'm at as Edmonton, but I prefer to use that much more ancient name of Amiskwaciy, the Beaver Hills. And as you can see, I'm here beside this beautiful river. In English, it's known as the North Saskatchewan River, but its real name is Amiskwaciy. It's the river that flows at a swift walking pace. And I'll say more about that in just a little while, but I just want to thank my friend, my new friend, Julia Jameson, working for OACAS, who contacted me and asked me if I would make this little video and share some thoughts with you just about the work that you do and I guess the difficulties, the challenges that are there, as well as the opportunities, I guess, for us to begin anew with Indigenous-Canadian relations. Maybe not begin anew, but renew ourselves and proceed differently. Maybe that's a better way to say it. I was born and raised here in Amiskwaciy. I've lived here in the city most of my life. And I was a high school social studies teacher for 10 years at a place called Kainai High School, the Kainai First Nation. Those are Blackfoot folks in what we call Southern Alberta now. And I work now as a teacher educator, and I study curriculum in the Faculty of Education at the University of Alberta. I study curriculum, and I think that's where maybe some of our shared interest lies. You know, you as folks who aid children, to care for children. And I think the work of curriculum is similarly situated, because I understand curriculum as an expression of forms of knowledge and knowing that we consider to be most valuable or most meaningful. And in a lot of cases, we're thinking about children, we're thinking about young people, and we're thinking about the stories that we want them to know, stories we want to tell them about the world and their place in it. So that's our shared interest, is in, you know, the meaning of children in our lives, how we understand ourselves as human beings. I also want you to know that I have a couple other names besides Dwayne. One of my names is Eapio Mahaka. It's a Blackfoot name I received about 30 years ago. And that's far runner, is how that's most simply translated. Somebody who runs a long ways. And my Nihiao name, my Cree name, is Mstahai. So I'm Big Bear. And you might recognize that name if you've had a chance to learn about recent Western Canadian history. Amiskwaciy was sort of the bad guy here in Western Canada on the prairies, because he didn't settle down on a reserve, and he didn't agree to treaty as readily as the government authorities wanted him to. One of the things that, you know, I've been working on for many years is trying to understand how the places where we live can give guidance to us on how to recover from colonialism, how to recover from colonial logic, how to recover from colonial worldview, and all the different things that, all the different legacies of it that continue to affect us, even though colonialism as an historical period has ended. How do these legacies carry on inside of us? And so one of the ways that, you know, I've figured out how to deal with this legacy and figured out how to try to heal myself is, you know, I've been drawn to walking as a form of healing. And I've noticed over the years that I think best when I'm on the move. Whenever I, you know, have something I'm struggling with, or I'm stuck, say if I'm trying to write something, I now sort of habitually go for a walk. And I just notice that things really open up for me. And of course, as a teacher, one of the things I'm aware of is that most of the time when we're, you know, going to try and engage in serious thinking on important issues, we're taught to sit down, right, and not get distracted. And my experience has been quite different. And so when I went to Kainai High School over 30 years ago now, as someone who grew up in the city, there were a lot of things that I didn't understand very well about Indigenous tradition and ceremony and just the wisdom that exists in places. And my Blackfoot friends kind of took pity on me, and they showed me a lot of things. They taught me a lot of things. And those experiences that I had with my Blackfoot friends, they changed my life. They changed the way I think. They changed the way that I understand myself as a human being. And so when I came back home here to amiskwaciy, I had a lot of questions about the place where my roots are quite deep. And there were a lot of things that I didn't know. I wasn't taught when I was younger. I didn't have those experiences. And so for the last 20 years, I've been trying my best to learn as much as I can about this place here. And walking beside this river has been a big source of inspiration for me. And I think it's insightful that the name for this river, amiskwaciy, the river that flows at a swift walking pace, it invites us to walk beside it. And so that's what I've done. Of course, without knowing that I was being invited, I was drawn to this river. And it's been a source of inspiration, as I said. And so Julie and I thought that some of you might like to come for a walk with me with the help of this GoPro and see the place, walk with me as I share some thoughts. So that's what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so, is just walk and try to address some of the things that Julia thought you might like to hear about. So let's get on the way here. So I said earlier, you know, one of my concerns is understanding our colonial inheritances. And my view is that it doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, we've all been affected by colonialism. And, those legacies carry on. Now, we have been affected by it differently. It's not all the same for us because of who we are, our identities, our cultures, our faiths, how we're positioned in all of that. We experience colonialism differently, but we're all a part of it. And I would say the fundamental teaching of colonialism is relationship denial. It's preoccupied with categorizing and classifying, and if you think about it, what you know about that history, I think it makes a lot of sense. this preoccupation that I just mentioned. The way I understand it is when Christopher Columbus did what he did, what it opened up was Europeans, of course, having the ability, the motivation to travel all around the world to places they had never visited before. And so what we have with all this work is information coming back to Europe, overwhelming amounts of information about what they considered to be new lands and new people, new to them, new cultures. And you also have this tremendous amount of products, new products, food, different things, chocolate, sugar, all those good things, tea, coffee, rushing back to Europe. And it has a tremendous influence on Europeans at this time. And so this is where, my view is, this is where we get this preoccupation with classifying and categorizing and dividing the world, basically, according to their own arbitrary ways, race, culture, and other things that, we've inherited, and all the consequences of that. And so this is why so much of education still involves like an encyclopedic approach to knowledge and knowing. More and more information. The more information you can hold, the more intelligent you're considered to be. Now, of course, in the past 2 decades here in this country, we've had this fairly intense confrontation with colonial history and the history of violence and oppression that Indigenous people in this country have experienced in all its many forms. It is important to say that residential schools are one of the most damaging aspects of that, but there are many aspects of colonial violence and oppression beyond the schools that have also occurred. So this is also important to consider. And so the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all the different commitments and calls to action and all the different, practices that have come out of that, I have a lot of respect for the commissioners and the work they did and the dedication they had. And there have been a lot of good things that have come from it. But I'm just going to be honest and say that I don't rely on Truth and Reconciliation in the work that I do. I don't actually talk to my students about it very much, because I think that those concepts of truth and reconciliation have been co-opted for other purposes. And they're often overused and misused to the point where we don't really know what they mean. And what I've noticed is that truth and reconciliation talk, especially at universities like the one I work at, truth and reconciliation talk has sort of been replaced by equity, diversity, and inclusiveness talk. And so this opportunity that, we may have had for Indigenous worldview, for Indigenous wisdom, for Indigenous approaches to knowledge and knowing, to actually lead in our engagement, our ability to kind of recover from colonialism, I think it's been lost mostly. And it's been co-opted by liberal philosophy. And liberal philosophy, of course, stems out of the colonial experience. And all those different experiences taken up in a political, economic, social, cultural way. And part of the problem with liberal philosophy is that it has the ability to constantly center itself as the answer to any question that you might ask. It has the power associated with it, so it has this ability to morph and continue to present itself as the answer. Just think about multiculturalism, for example, as a kind of a manifestation of liberal philosophy. And I think the ways in which truth and reconciliation has sort of ramped up and replaced, or been replaced, I should say, by EDI talk, is also a manifestation of liberal philosophy's ability to constantly center itself as the answer to these problems that we face. And my view is that we're kind of at a point of urgency now, where there's lots of people who have been so encoded by this way of understanding life and living and knowledge and knowing that they can't actually imagine other knowledge systems or other ways to be a human being. And so I think we're in a crisis right now in our society, in our education system, culturally. And I think the truth is that for many generations, Canadians have been taught to look elsewhere for sources of inspiration about how to deal with these challenges and these difficulties. And they've been taught to ignore what's all around them. And so here, I want to draw your attention to, something I think it is very important is that, of course, Indigenous people, just like the people we call Indigenous, just like other people all around the world, they have really old understandings of what it means to live well, what it means to be healthy as a human being, how all those things can take place. And they've mostly been disregarded, I would say, in the field of education, and maybe in social work or childcare, in those experiences that you have had. They've mostly been disregarded as not very important, or not to be taken seriously, or irrelevant to the challenges we face today. And so my view is that we're at a turning point right now where we can't carry on the trajectory we've been on. It's not sustainable. It's not going to last. And so the sources of inspiration, as I said, are Indigenous wisdom that exists in the places where you live and where you work. For us here, what I can say is an important insight is that we don't call ourselves Cree. That's a name that comes from French missionaries. Les Cris, those are people who yell or people who cry. We call ourselves Nihiwak. And that name has to do with the number 4. So we're taught to pay attention to patterns of 4 and how they manifest themselves in the world and what that has to do with us as human beings. How we can't separate ourselves from that. Even if we wanted to, we can try, which is part of what colonial worldview tries to do. It tries to teach us that our needs are always more important than the needs of other forms of life. But the wisdom practices that I've, still trying to learn about, it's about these patterns of 4. And so maybe you're already thinking about patterns of 4 that you're aware of, directions, seasons, whatever else might come to mind. But the message that I've received over many years is that what goes on outside here also goes on inside of you. And so there's 4 parts to a person. There's the mental, the emotional, the spiritual, and the physical. And so the message that we get all the time is, if you want to create a healthy person, someone who's well, someone who's balanced, then you have to figure out how to address all 4 parts. You can't just rely on the intellect. You'll create an off-balance person if you rely on that intellect only. So how can you address the emotion? How can you address the spirit? How can you address the body in a meaningful way? And also in a way where they're balanced with each other. They sort of speak to each other. They interact with each other. So in this Nihiao Matsuin, this Cree way of life, Cree way of understanding living, that's a key insight. And so I think that, in our struggles to repair our relationships, Indigenous-Canadian relationships, and our struggles to try to build trust amongst each other when we're trying to do something like care for our children, when we're trying to recover from all that's gone on that's divided us, I think we make a really big mistake as human beings when we think of it as a purely human-to-human problem. What I've been taught is if you want human-to-human relationships to be better, you have to work on ecological relationships. In other words, the way we think about the life out here has a distinctive bearing on how we think about human life and in our relationships with humans. Here's what I was told. This is what the old man told me many years ago. He said to me, the most important thing that you can do in your life, in your work, is connect people with the gifts that exist in the place where they live. He said, it doesn't matter who they are or where they come from. Connect them with the gifts that exist in the place where they live, because when you do that, he said, they're more likely to see it as part of themselves, those gifts, as part of themselves as human beings. And then they're going to want to protect them. And he said that's when we can come alongside each other as human beings, is when we understand ourselves as connected by what gives us life. We're unified by our shared interest in the health of the life around us. Much more than we are unified by, a flag or an anthem or the right to vote. We're unified by what gives us life. And that teaching, that's a fundamental treaty teaching. And I know, across the country, we have different relationships with treaty. In some areas, it's less prominent. But out here, this is Treaty 6 territory. I've been taught to think of it as a major source of inspiration. And part of the reason for that is that, what we're taught is that the original treaties out here are actually with the birds and the animals. They're the ones who shared with us how to live here in a ecological way, to be good relatives. And so we have obligations and responsibilities, them to us, us to them, and also to the plants, to the water, to the sky, to the stars, to the sun, the moon, clouds. That's understood as a treaty, wakotuin. It's a sacred covenant, sacred agreement. And when the Queen's representatives came into this territory and they asked to make an agreement like that, our people understood it as that sacred agreement, that sacred covenant, but they also understood it as connected to those original treaties with all the other life around here. And that's a part of the treaty, Treaty 6 anyway, that we've never had a chance to talk about. If it gets reduced to a business deal or a contract where one group of people gets stuff for free and these other people, they pay taxes. That's such a violent denial of relationship, of kinship possibility, that it's had really dramatic consequences for us. And so treaty is a major source of inspiration for me because, what we were taught is that it's an adoption ceremony where our people agreed to treat the newcomers, the Queen's people, as our relatives. And we agreed to share with each other. We agreed to look after each other and teach each other, and for mutual benefit. All right, and some of the connections I have, if you think about that treaty handshake that probably a lot of you have seen, that's on the medal, treaty medal, they said there's 4 things that come from that handshake, 4 teachings from it. So the first one is amiskwaciwiyiniwak, which is about engaging in an ethical way with a fellow human being. It's about recognizing a fellow human being, treating that person with kindness, with compassion, with respect, as much as you can. So that's an important amiskwaciwiyiniwak. And they say amiskwaciwiyiniwak and amiskwaciy. And those 2 have to do with peaceful coexistence. So it has to do with, first of all, working as allies, supporting each other in those different ways. But working together, having those good relations and being allies, not just in a military way, right? And then the last one, the 4th one, I think is the most important as well. It's amiskwaciwiyiniwak. And that one is that we teach each other's children well, which might be the ultimate act of kinship. If I give you my child and say, teach my child, share with my child, what you know, and I'll do the same with yours. It's a beautiful teaching, I think. So what does this all have to do with me out here walking? Well, also in the Hiawewan, in the Cree language, we have a concept that we rely on a lot. We say wakotuin. Mia wakotuin. And wakotuin is about kinship, just what I've been talking about. It's about understanding yourself as a human being within a network of relationships. So human. First of all, you have your family, your immediate family. And then you have your extended family. And then you have your community. And then you have the rest of, the human community. All people you're connected to. Because we all need to eat. We all need to drink. We all need to breathe. And we all need love. So we're connected as human beings, even though we might not be related. But wakotuin is also about extending your kinship past human beings to include all the life around you. So, as I said earlier, human to sky, human to sun, human to moon, human to river, human to tree, human to the earth, human to plant, to animal, and so on. So wakotuin is about how we're enmeshed in a whole bunch of relationships that we depend upon for our survival. And so the intelligent human response to an awareness or acknowledgement that you are enmeshed in that way, an intelligent response is to try to live your life in a way that makes sure that those relationships are healthy and that they carry on past your own lifetime. So it's connected to ancestral, what they call ancestral thinking, right? So you're not just thinking of your own lifetime in sort of a selfish, way, arrogant way. You're thinking about those before you and those yet to come and your role in all of that. So that's what wakotuin is about. It's about this understanding of kinship and our responsibilities and obligations as part of that relational network. What I learned just a few years ago from one of the language experts here in this area, his name's Reuben Quinn, and he's from Saddle Lake First Nation. What I learned is that wakotuin etymologically is very interesting to study and understand. Because wakotuin, if you break the words down, it literally refers to walking. But walking in a particular way, walking in a bent over way with your arm or your back bent over. You're walking, you're moving on the land in a reciprocal way which means you're seeking to pay attention to all this life that's here. You're seeking to hold hands with all this life in that kinship way. So wakotuin is literally moving over the land in a bent over way, in a reciprocal bent over way. And so if you want to learn about kinship, you have to be out here walking in that manner that wakotuin calls you to. And I didn't know this until recently, but as I said earlier, I was drawn to walk beside this river just sort of instinctually, I would say. And I didn't know that I was learning about kinship by being out here. So all of this is to say that in this wisdom tradition kind of way, if you want to learn how to be a better relative, the best thing you can do is be out here and pay attention to these relationships here, what they have to do with you. And this has an effect on how you think. This has an effect on how you are as a human being. It has an effect on how you understand knowledge and knowing. And it has an effect on how you understand life in the place where you live. And that's really an important point, is that I'm here. I'm drawing on the wisdom from this place. So you need to pay attention to where you are. You need to pay attention to the wisdom that's existed in your place for a really long time. And spend some time thinking about how that wisdom can guide you in the work that you do, in the challenges that you have. And I think as far as Indigenous-Canadian relations go, if we spend a lot more time honoring the gifts that exist in the place where we live and how that unifies us as human beings, that we'll have a better start at trying to repair the relationships that have been denied and renew them on different terms. Renew them on terms that are connected to the life around us. That's what I would say. Now, this walking, to me, I'm going to be doing it for the rest of my life. I'm never going to have this sorted out. I'm never going to have the answer. As I continue to struggle in my work and my life, try to puzzle on how to make this world, something that my grandchildren are going to want to live in, I'm going to have to keep walking. I'm going to have to keep holding hands with all this life here. And I'm aware some of you might not be so down for walking. Maybe you're not ready to walk with me or in the place where you are. And if that's the case, of course, this is not something that can be insisted upon or imposed. It has to be a personal decision, because it's a kind of a personal reckoning, I would say. But my question would be, in your concern for children, if you're in your care for children, what are you doing to learn about kinship in an ecological way? What are you doing in that manner? If you're not walking, what can you do to ground yourself, to balance yourself in those four parts, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, so that you can approach your work in a balanced way, and then of course the children can experience that themselves. So this is, I guess, my message for you here today, and just using myself as an example for my struggles, the things I've done, and asking you to think about what would help you. What are your struggles, and how can the life around you, the wisdom around you, have a more prominent role in how you approach that, and how you approach the challenge of caring for children. Hi, kinanas komten wow. I thank you all, and I wish you all good things in your struggles and in your work.